Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I want to say thank you to Social Media Cowboys for sponsoring this week's episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. If you need help with a website, if you need social media needs for your business, if you need help with AdWords, SEO, all those things that you know you should be doing, but you are too busy to do or you're too confused about, they are the experts that you need in your corner. If you're interested in launching a podcast, such as mine, they help me edit my podcast and do a fantastic job making sure that all of the technical side of it is handled and we launch a nice, neat, edited podcast episode each week. So I want to thank Social Media Cowboys for their continued sponsorship of the Confidence Through Health podcast. You can find them at socialmediacowboys.com, or you can find them as well with other sponsors at confidencethroughhealth.com. Well, I want to thank you, Emma, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Happy to be here.
So when I was looking through, like you wrote a book, How to Be a Healthy Human. And as we get through some of your experiences in life and what brought you to that, talk to us a little bit about those, just like from an early age, you talk about this in your book, from an early age, you were pulled and drawn to like health as a like way of seeing how to help people.
Yeah, I actually wanted to be a doctor when I was a teenager. I watched every TV show about doctors and stuff. And I was also drawn to autism, which is really interesting, as why I wound up with a son on the spectrum, technically on the spectrum. But yeah, even back as a teenager, and I wanted to be a brain surgeon is what I wanted to be. And I was just fascinated by, I think, truth. I just wanted to know how things worked. And so, so cutting things open. And I talk about in the book, I had I would come home from biology, so high school biology, and we'd dissected a sheep's heart or something, and I brought it home to carry on dissecting it. Right. So I was always very interested, but my father talked me out of it. Yeah, he didn't think that was at the time the right profession for a nice Jewish girl as I was. Right. And so he talked me out of that. So I went in a different direction.
Yeah.
Initially, at least.
Yeah, initially, right? And then you got back into like, okay, how did that come back in? Because I think that's right. That's a way that God was like, okay, wait a minute, I put this on your heart. You need to do this. I had a similar thing myself go through that. So
exactly, and it's so interesting how God works. I look back now. I've become a Christian now as an adult. I wasn't back then, and I look at it, and I think it was the right thing. Because if I'd have gone to medical school as a teenager, I might have been brainwashed, like so many other doctors, and you learn all of this, and big pharma funds all of that, and the only way to health is through taking pharmaceuticals. And so I went this other route, and I became an actuary. And so for listeners that don't know what an actuary is, don't worry, most people don't. But it's a lot of data and analyzing a lot of different kinds of data to analyze risks. So you'll find a lot of actuaries in insurance, for example, health insurance, life insurance. What's the probability people are going to die? What are the risk factors that are going to make people die sooner or later? And then health insurance. So going to get sick and have heart attacks, very expensive. And then in pensions, and I actually started out in the pensions world. So that is, how much do we need to invest today to be able to pay for pensions when people retire? Back in the day, it would be you retire at 60, 65, and your company that you'd work for a lifetime would pay you a pension. And so I was doing all of that, but I got a lot broader. So I got into broader employee benefits and got into the healthcare that employers would offer their employees. And then my now nearly 20-year-old was diagnosed at age 5 with Asperger's and ADHD. And that woke me up to, I'd been, he'd been my first child. I did what the pediatrician told me to do, all of the conventional healthcare and everything. And he was sick from first 6 months. He had stomach problems. He was throwing up. He couldn't keep, I was breastfeeding him, but he couldn't keep it down, and he'd throw it up and everything. And he was a mess. And they put him on a first pharmaceutical when he was 6 months old, like a sort of baby Prilosec that had to be compounded at a pharmacy. And the side effects were horrible. They'd leave leave him rigid. And, and in the back of my head, I was like, oh, this just doesn't seem right. But again, I didn't know anything.
Right.
So this went on for a number of years. And then he's in school, in preschool, and he was having terrible time. He was obsessive compulsive disorder. He would have tantrums. He had a lot of sensory issues and all of the stomach issues and all of that. Tons of ear infections all the time, antibiotics, you name it. A lot of similar stories that a lot of parents like me have had. And so eventually the teachers at his school said, hey, you need to go and get him checked out because, we can't handle him at the school. He's disrupting. Right. So we got a full diagnosis in a number of weeks. And basically he was diagnosed with Asperger's and ADHD, which in the brain actually work against each other. The ADHD, the brain is actually working slowly. They look like they've got a motor, but the brain's working slowly. And in Asperger's, it's working too fast. And he's taking in too much information and trying to process it. So that was a wake-up call to me. And the doctors there, they're like, well, he needs to be on drugs and the prognosis for his life is not going to be that great. And I'm just like, no, there's something wrong here. Yeah. And actually, I tell this story in the book, a mom at the school whose son had been diagnosed with full autism at age 3 and who now was age 8 and was almost normal. Yeah. She'd gone to a doctor, Dr. Jerry Cartzenell, and she said, hey, look, let's go out for coffee. And she sat me down and she just explained all what's wrong with conventional healthcare and things about the body and the microbiome and all this kind of stuff. And it just got me reading. So I just started reading and I basically never stopped. And that changed everything. I ended up having to take some time off work. I took, I think, 3 months unpaid leave to try and figure out what my son needed and get him all the different therapies and things he needed, change his diet. We did all that. We can get into that. And then I went back to work. I worked for a big global consulting firm and I just changed my focus and I became more part of the healthcare side rather than pensions.
Right. And so in that with the with the initial visits with the doctor when they're like, okay, this is what, was there ever any talk of holistic types of therapies or any of that kind of stuff? It was all just, nope, this is where this is the path. There's only
and that's
one
the thing,
path.
they don't even ask what he's eating.
Right.
Especially there's so many ADHD kids. Like, what are you feeding them? What are they eating? What are all the E numbers and the red dyes and what is it they're eating? How much sugar are they eating? So there was absolutely none of that. Nothing at all.
Yeah. And it's such a young age. And this from looking at just numbers, like you said, with looking at heart attack risks and all those types of things. Age plays a huge factor in when you get exposed to things. Yeah. Especially if it's something that you're going to be continually exposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first, I want to say 10 years of life, at least 18, while we've got our kids in our home, those first 18 years are so absolutely critical, but the first 10 years, and that's what I was reading about. So he's 5 years old now, and his brain's a mess. Yeah. And I was reading, you've got to do it in those first 10 years. You can fix his brain. His brain can heal. The body can heal. Even as an adult, I really badly hurt my neck last week. And I know I have a weakness in my neck, but it can heal. It might take a while. The last time I did something this bad from working out, the last time I did something this bad, it took nearly a year. But the human body can heal. But when you're young, when you're 5 years old, your brain is really developing. And so that's why I became a demon, right? I was reading everything I could get my hands on. I got very radical with the diet and the supplements and the therapies he was having because I wanted to get it fixed as soon as possible.
Right.
So age was a big part of it.
And that's the diet piece is such a big piece of, and I cringe when I see, families. And actually I saw it today. I was at the chiropractor and somebody was having their kids draw while they were waiting. They're coloring those pages and stuff. And of course, Thanksgiving's coming up when we're recording this. And the one of the ladies that works there was like, "Oh, why don't you draw what you're going to have for Thanksgiving dinner?" To the little, she had to have been 3 years old. And the mom just turned around and goes, "Oh, she just draw chicken nuggets if that's what she was going to have." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh," that was just I immediately was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm cringing." This is just because there's so many people that just focus on, just if that's all they'll eat, just give them that instead of, and it's not so much force feeding them, but it's providing the correct options.
Yeah, well, absolutely. My son, my youngest son, I have a son that's younger. He's an Eagle Scout, and
Hmm.
so we were very involved in the Boy Scouts. And I became the merit badge counselor
Hmm.
for the cooking merit badge.
Hmm.
And so if in order to get your cooking merit badge, which is a required one to
Yeah.
get your ranking in Boy Scouts, you had to get through me.
Yeah.
And so the booklet it's not terrible. I mean, it teaches you how to cook, and you
Sure.
learn all the different methods of cooking. But it teaches you the macros, right? So
Hmm.
protein, carbohydrates, and stuff. But then it tells you you've got to drink milk every day,
Yeah.
and all these kinds of things. And so I did a class which told the truth, and it
Right.
even explained a little bit as to why the U.S. government pyramid looks like this, and it doesn't look like the Canadian one, right? Which
Right.
doesn't have milk on there anywhere,
Yeah.
and you need a lot more plants, and why plants are so important. And so I taught it quite differently, and I actually turned that class because I did it for a few years. I
Hmm.
turned it. I've got a video of that, and I call it "How to Teach Your Teenagers About Nutrition." When
Oh,
your
nice.
kid leaves your home at 18 years old, they need to know what a parsnip is.
Yeah.
That's my big thing. It's kind of become a bit of a joke. I had friends over at my house, and through COVID, I became the one that was speaking out, and a lot of my
Sure.
friends that eat sort of the standard American diet, and they'd come to my house, and I do this little test on them. I pull something out the fridge and like, what's this? They
Hmm.
don't know. They
Yeah.
don't know what bok choy is. They
Yeah.
didn't know what a parsnip was,
Yeah.
and so I'm like, you're a kid when they leave your home, they need to know what these different vegetables are and how to cook them properly.
Right. And that cooking them in grease with batter on top of them
Right,
to fry them is
right.
not the best way to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how many times since and you talk about it in your book as far as the story of going to the doctor's office and all that. Um, and I know that you've talked with people, like how many times do you get that same reaction from another parent that's like, oh yeah, we had the doctor said the same exact thing to us.
Yeah, it's all the time. I find it really sad now, which is why I ended up writing the book. That's part of it, to speak out, because I belong to a really large church, and we had, so for example, on October 31st, we have something called Fall Fest. It's a giant
Hmm.
festival, and there's probably, I don't know, a couple of thousand people, if not more, come with
Yeah.
all their kids, and we have like carousel rides, and it's and
Hmm.
the old-fashioned fair and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And we serve there, and we're working on the bouncy castles or whatever, and you see all these kids. And when you're a parent of a kid that's developmentally challenged or has been in the past,
Hmm.
you're much more aware of it.
Yeah.
And I see all these kids, and it breaks my heart. It's like, almost like half the kids have something going on.
Yeah.
Either they're obese already, like 8 years old,
Hmm.
or they're you can see they're not looking you in the eye, or they're just
Right.
like kind of all over the place, or yeah, and there's something going on. And so I see it a lot more.
Hmm.
And so that's why I wanted to speak out, because the parents, they just don't know what they don't know,
Yeah.
and they're just believing in their doctors, and it's kind of overwhelmed. You get this little squiggly thing put in your arms, and you're like,
Yeah.
keep it alive till they're 18, and they're like, oh, what do I
Yeah.
do? And they're just going to listen to the person in the white coat. So that's the
Yep.
whole reason for the name of my book. I just like, the person in the white coat is just a human being who
Right.
went to school and learned certain things, but then and because they had so much of these certain things like conventional medicine, let's say, that had to
Yep.
fill their brain and their curriculum, they didn't have time to learn all these other things about the human
Right.
body. And then you bring God into it, and they don't have a lot of them are not, they don't have a God-centered view of the universe, I would
Right.
say.
Yeah.
And I think the doctors that do already know that there's something wrong with the way we're pushing these man-made products and not
Hmm.
looking at the innate healing ability of the human body. And so
Right.
for me, it was bringing those two things together, because I became a Christian around the same time, when my son was young. And so it was all became, I'm just a seeker of the truth, and
Hmm.
I'm curious, and I
Yeah.
want to know, how does all this work? And so when I'm out there speaking, especially to families in my church all the time, they're like, well,
Yeah.
my doctor said this. And so I
Yeah.
address this in the book.
Yeah.
What do you do when your doctor says this? And I
Hmm.
talk about this. There's really three types of doctors. There's those that are completely open-minded, and anything you bring to them, they're going to listen to, and
Right.
and even if they don't know much beyond the pharmaceuticals, they'll give you the pharmaceuticals. But if you say, oh, I heard that such and such a diet might be helpful, they'll be like, oh yeah, do that, and tell me how it goes.
Yeah.
And then you've got those that they're sort of in the middle. They kind of know what they're doing is not right, but they're too busy paying
Mhm.
their medical school bills and feeding their
Right.
family to do any broader training. But then you've
Yeah.
got a huge group of doctors who just don't want to know. I mean, they're very happy with the status quo, the
Mhm.
trappings of being a doctor, being able to charge these great amounts. And so
Yeah.
I put the doctors generally into these three different categories. But I was listening to some of your past interviews, actually. I was listening to, I think, the cancer doctor, and he
Yeah.
was saying that an oncologist will, when you say, well, shall I eat better? And they go, oh, no, don't worry about the
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
Yeah, just take, all the poisons we're going to put into your body, and the food's not
Yeah.
going to help at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough because lay people, they just don't know, and they don't know who to
Right.
believe, and they get very fearful when they're not feeling well, and they just think that the person in the white coat is going to have all the answers.
Right. Um, yeah, and our pediatrician, I was telling you before we started, and I've mentioned this before, our 13-year-old son has been diagnosed with ADHD, and so we're on that, and we identified it really early. We didn't actually get the full-on diagnosis until later when we needed it for school for him to get extra help and stuff. But we knew pretty early. We were like, oh yeah, and so we addressed it with diet, and his pediatrician was like, well, and she to this day, like if I just texted her, and because she's a friend of ours as well, I texted her and just said, okay, we're done. We need the medication. It would be at the pharmacy in like probably 10 minutes. Because she's like, I'm ready to write the script whenever you want it. Um, but she also knows what I do, and like she's like, no, I mean, if he's able to manage without
Yeah,
exposure to it,
yeah,
let's do that as best we can, because it's yeah, it's obviously all of those medications, and I think any medication is that, the more it's compounded in your system over
yeah,
time, the worse it's going to
yeah.
be. But still, any exposure is bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and it affects the brain, and to get on medication that young. I
Hmm.
mean, I was so terrified when my son went to college because all of those ADHD drugs, they call them study drugs now. And the
Yeah.
kids in college are like handing them out, like this will help
Hmm.
you focus.
Hmm.
And I think I even mentioned it in the book. I got that phone call. I mentioned in the book that I'm dreading the phone call. And I wrote the book a couple of years ago. I got the phone call a couple of months ago. My son, he's doing engineering. He's doing mechanical
Yeah.
engineering and aerospace engineering. He's overwhelmed. When
Yeah.
he was young, when he was 13, he would have a lot of trouble organizing himself. I mean, that's
Hmm.
part of the brain struggles, right? So
Right.
we would address different solutions, and he writes everything down. He's got a terrible memory for things he needs to do,
Yeah.
amazing memory for facts and figures.
Right.
So so we had strategies. So he'd learn to write things down and all these different things, and what you're going to do each day. So we had those kinds of strategies, and he was doing really well. His first year, he did amazingly. I was amazed. On his own, he was like on the dean's list. I was like, my kid is crazy. Well, now, first year was kind of easy. He's this amazing
Yeah.
smart engineer. Second year, now it's kind of getting a little bit harder. So 2 months ago, he phones me. He said, hey, mom, I hear that Adderall can help you study.
Oh my
And I'm like,
gosh.
oh my God. I was like, okay, be calm, be calm. Because he's also that kind of rebel that if you tell him not to do something, he'll do it.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, stay calm, don't freak out. And
Right.
I just sort of talked him through what are the downsides and what that does in
Hmm.
your brain. And amphetamines. His father, who I'm not married to anymore, his
Yep.
his father is a meth addict,
Hmm.
and so has a lot of the same struggles, is probably on the spectrum himself, got actually diagnosed in his 40s. That's a whole nother story. But
Yeah.
my son, I know, has the predisposition to
Hmm.
have a drug problem. And so I just carefully talked through him the downsides of those drugs. And you hear in the news these school shootings. I mean,
Yeah.
if I can bring that up, these
Yeah.
school shootings, and they talk about these kids, and they turn out to be on the spectrum or
Hmm.
ADHD, and oh, they were off their meds that day. It's
Yeah.
actually the opposite. They were
Right.
on their meds that day.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of data. And there's a guy, I forget his name, he actually made a movie, a documentary on this, that if you look at all the school shootings in the last 10 years and you go to the evidence and what happened, they had all either recently been put on one of these drugs, or they'd
Right.
increased the dose or whatever. And it does crazy things to your brain. And
Yeah.
they just eat holes in your brain.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. So I'm always against it. There's nutrient deficiencies. So yes, I mean, gluten-free, absolutely, and all the diet, and get more
Right.
nutrients into you. But I think when you're really exhibiting symptoms, I think you need more than even a healthy diet can give you.
Hmm.
And so, I'm a big proponent of supplements. And
Yeah.
so my son, who's 20, is really, if he's having a difficult week, I'm like, hey, did you remember to take your vitamins today.
Mhm.
And so, having on a very strict regimen
Yeah.
of vitamins. And some people, they need more, that recommended daily allowance
Oh yeah,
is almost
it's
nonsense,
yeah.
and some people, and they found there's a lot of science on this, that
Mhm.
if you've been deficient for a long time, you become dependent on something.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've heard of the studies on like niacin,
Mhm.
B3, and schizophrenia.
Mhm.
So a lot of schizophrenics, they found they're actually grossly deficient in niacin. And they knew this in the 1950s,
Yeah.
where there wasn't really a difference between pellagra, which is a deficiency in B3, and schizophrenia.
Mhm.
And so they found that, but you have to have such high doses. So they're
Yeah.
getting these schizophrenics out of hospitals by giving them super, super high doses of B3, because they've been short of it for so long,
Right.
they end up becoming completely dependent on it, and then they need really high doses. So the
Yeah.
recommended daily allowance, maybe a guideline. And yes, certain nutrients can become toxic at really, really high
Sure.
levels.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you try a supplement and you think, oh, it's not really doing anything for me, you're probably not taking enough. And
Yeah.
especially for these ADHD kids, the B vitamin is super important for the brain.
Right. Well, and I found that out myself when I because my degree's in exercise physiology. I went into the corporate world, sort of similar to you, like that, like I had the calling to do health stuff, went away from it, came back to it almost 9 years now. And the more I started researching stuff, and I'm like, and of course, when you start out in your own business, like the ups and downs and swings and emotional is like crazy. And so I was like, okay, there's got to be something that's gonna, and I was like, okay, I'm not getting enough omega-3. And so I started taking omega-3 and I was like, okay, how much do I take? I'm like, let's just double up whatever I've heard and just see what happens, because of that initial, like, let's just boost it initially and see what happens. And so I remember taking six, I don't remember exactly the amount of each pill, but I was taking six of them a day, spaced out, and my mood just immediately just boom, like the swings were almost gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then now I'm down, I take one of those same pills, the same size, just one a day, and it's enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's great.
and of course now, I'm eating a more omega. I focused on eating more of that too. So it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm getting more just from a natural source, but also
Yeah.
keeping that supplement from the
Yeah.
standpoint of like, okay, I know I'm susceptible to swings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like,
Absolutely.
how do
Good.
we make sure
Learning
we
to read
prevent
your own
that?
body. Very
Mhm.
important. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um, so you said that, that we can get to this point where we are depraved from things and we're like, okay, we're not getting enough of this, we're not getting enough of that. And you can look at, if you're in tune enough, you can look at the food supply and go like, okay, this was fortified with something. Okay, the only reason it was fortified with something is somebody came out with a research project somewhere that said
Yeah.
we need more of this across the board.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily everybody needs more of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to be careful of those fortified foods, because often it's a synthetic form that they're
Yeah.
creating really cheaply, and it's not from natural foods. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why pellagra maybe disappeared, because they
Mhm.
started putting niacin in bread and things like that. But there's
Mhm.
so much other crap in bread nowadays.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think fortified foods are where it's at. You're an
Yeah.
individual. Your body, your
Mhm.
chemistry, and your biology is very, very individual. You need to learn to read your own signs. Your body will tell you what it's craving.
Yeah.
I was a vegan for years. I talk about this in the book, my sort of food journey. I've got a whole
Mhm.
chapter on nourishment, and I was a vegan for years. And then I got married again, and my carnivore husband comes in, and so now we've sort of got a balance. But I
Yeah.
actually found that, although I'm much more comfortable living on plants, I mean,
Mhm.
I just love the variety and the taste and what you can do with plants is
Yeah.
so much. I enjoy it more. My body sometimes tells me it needs some meat, or it needs some
Mhm.
fish, it needs some mackerel or something. So you've got to learn to read your body, and
Right.
don't just because the label says it's fortified with this, that, and the other thing, that's going to be what you need. You're
Right.
absolutely an individual. So
Yeah.
learn to listen to your body. It's incredibly designed. It'll tell you what it needs.
Right. Well, and that's a key component in one of the things you make in a statement in your book about, and I 100% believe this, and I've said this almost word for word to people before, is that in today's age, especially in a Western country, not okay, third world country, you're still living in, there's all kinds of issues there. But if you've got the abilities that we have in the United States to get food, to get, the healthcare you need when you need it, you break your arm, something like that, so you don't, die of an infection that could be easily preventable. That there's no reason a human is not living to 100 years old.
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
is that just because of the knowledge that we have?
No, I mean, I think, I focus on the Bible. I read the Bible every
Mhm.
day. If you actually read it, that's
Mhm.
basically what God said for a
Yeah.
start. Well, after the fall, so after
Mhm.
Noah, yes, there was like Methuselah living to like 300 years old, but
Yep.
after the flood, so the
Yep.
new world, people were living to 100, 120 years
Mhm.
old. And it's not because of, medical, breakthroughs and this and that.
Right.
And it's interesting, you talk about, the developing world. Most of my work corporately was outside of the US. I would work with US multinationals that are expanding around the world and they're setting up all over the world. And I
Okay.
did work in like 100 different countries. And what got me so upset is that other countries are starting to look to the US
Yeah.
because they think, oh, you've got all this amazing healthcare and all this fantastic innovation, and we need that. But it's people in other parts of the world are living much longer.
Mhm.
I talk about the population studies because I am a bit of a data geek.
Yeah.
So like the blue zones.
Mhm.
So if you heard of the blue zones
Yep.
where people are regularly living to over 100, and the blue
Yep.
zones, blue because that's the color they colored them on a map when
Mhm.
they were looking where in the world are the people the most centenarians, people
Right.
living over the age of 100. And they're in like Costa Rica, up a little area of Costa Rica, and Japan, an area of
Right.
Japan, actually Loma Linda, California,
Right.
which is a very high percentage of Seventh-day Adventists, and they
Mhm.
live, I think it's a plant, I think they have a plant-based diet,
Yeah.
and they don't drink alcohol, and so they have
Right.
extremely healthy lifestyle anyway.
Right.
And then they definitely don't eat the standard American diet. And
Right.
then Sardinia and some other places, Greece, Icaria in Greece. And they studied, what is it that they're doing?
Yeah.
And so some of these, they're the poorest people in the world. They don't have
Mhm.
access to healthcare like we have access in the US. They're
Right.
just eating really, really healthy foods.
Mhm.
They're socially interacting. They're not on computers every day and looking at
Right.
2D pictures of people on a screen. They're
Right.
interacting every day. They're not taking drugs. They don't need vitamins because their food is grown in the local soil,
Right.
and so they're doing what we might call now regenerative farming. They
Mhm.
just call it farming,
Yeah.
traditional
Yeah.
farming. They're rotating their crops, or they have their own little backyard and they're growing a whole bunch of
Yep.
different things. So so I don't think it's necessarily because of I think it's in spite of
Yeah.
all the medical breakthroughs, really,
Yeah.
that we can live to 120. But I think it's absolutely possible. And then I think I'm not saying don't use conventional healthcare at all.
Sure.
I
Sure.
mean, and again, I think the cancer doctor was saying that, and I do address this in my book. So the second half of my book is all about different medical complaints. So I talk about infectious disease, and we could get into that in the flu
Right.
season, and
Right.
then chronic disease and all of that, and diabetes and heart disease, and
Mhm.
I do touch on cancer. And I'm not saying don't use conventional, medicine if you're
Right.
stage 3 or stage 4 cancer.
Sure.
Absolutely, and the revolutions that they've made and the steps forward, that's great. But that don't put your life on that. Don't
Yeah.
think that a man-made chemical is going to make you any healthier. It's not.
Right.
It might get you over an immediate hurdle. Especially, you mentioned breaking your arm. If you break your
Mhm.
arm, you need somebody to set it, and they can
Right.
do that better now than maybe in the older days. If you're in a car accident, God forbid, then yes, they can get you through that. So
Sure.
I think it's a balance. But I think people need to understand individuality. So it's back to
Mhm.
the biochemical individuality of your body, and understanding where you're at right now in your health and
Yeah.
what your body needs, and that there's alternatives. I think that's the biggest message that I want
Mhm.
people to take away from my book, is that you don't have to do what the doctor in the white coat says.
Yeah.
Listen maybe to the diagnostics. I mean, we do have much better diagnostics. So
Sure.
listen to that, find out maybe where your weakness is, so you kind of know where to focus. But then look at the range of alternatives that are going to work much better with your body than
Mhm.
maybe all of these man-made chemicals, which
Yeah.
conventional medicine just says, well, you've got to do that.
Yeah.
Standard of care, right?
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that we were at my wife and I were at a birthday party for a friend of ours the other night, and we were talking to somebody, and he was asking me a bunch of questions and da 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 da, and my wife has had some struggles with some stuff from a health standpoint, and she brought it up. She was like, yeah, well, speaking of me, asked the doctor to run this test, and she was like, "We don't do that test. What are you talking about? This primary care doctor.
Mm,
But your blood work looks fine. But okay, well, then we need to go deeper because
yeah, yeah,
the body doesn't
yeah,
feel well, but the
yeah,
blood work looks
yeah,
fine. Well, okay,
yeah.
then we did the wrong test,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's
right?
the thing. The doctors, I mean, they call it gaslighting now. So
Mhm.
your blood results look fine, and they do these very standard tests, and everything is within standard ranges. I wrote a whole very detailed article about understanding that and where those
Mhm.
standard ranges come from. They
Yeah.
basically come from a population of everybody that has had those tests.
Mhm.
But the problem is, in the US population now, 80% of people are unhealthy.
Yeah.
So 80% of people, and that's your standard. And they're just saying
Mhm.
that that's standard, not necessarily that's what's healthy.
Right.
So, yeah. And so if you're having symptoms, but your blood work is technically normal, you've just got to dig further and do some of
Yep.
these non-standard tests. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what's funny about when I get my, because I go for checkups because there's things that you can see and know, and there's things that
Yeah.
just like you want to make sure that nothing comes up. Like,
Yeah.
so I go for checkups and
Yeah.
every so often get my blood done just to make
Yeah.
sure that there's no
Yeah.
like crazy things happening. And it's always like, well, you're, on the things that you should be on the low end of because the range used to be lower than it is now. I'm on the low end, right? And the things where I'm supposed to be on the high end, I'm on the high end. And there's very few things where I'm right in the middle of what
Right.
normal
Right.
is now.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
not to say that I'm perfect, but I've adopted a healthier lifestyle,
Yeah.
and and getting to the point of looking at longevity and not just living a long life, but living a long, healthy life,
Yeah.
trying to reverse
Yeah.
that aging process.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, but
know.
I think listeners need to know where some of those normal ranges come from. I mean, let's take cholesterol, right?
Mhm.
I have super high cholesterol. My
Mhm.
cholesterol's over 300 most
Yeah.
of the time. And
Yeah.
I've been, even when I was a vegan, my
Mhm.
cholesterol is over 300. It's in my family, it's in my genes.
Right.
And so, I've had doctors over the years, well, you really should be on a statin. No,
Mhm.
I really don't think so. I think I'm fine.
Yeah.
And my mother, who's in the UK, her doctors would refuse to see her anymore if she didn't get on drugs.
Oh
She
wow.
came. We had a blood test done for her when she was visiting the UK once. She's over 400,
Oh
really super
wow.
high. Almost nearly 80 years old, and
Mhm.
and doing fine. So it's an understanding that those numbers, that it's very reductionist science as to
Mhm.
where that comes from.
Yeah.
And I've written a lot about this, but it's my pet hate, because when I left my corporate life 18 months ago, and I didn't have access to all the phenomenal healthcare that we had in our company plan. And
Yeah.
so now I'm on my own, and I went to this policy. I won't see what the policy was. And they're like, well, you should have a surcharge because your cholesterol's high. I'm like, have you seen how healthy I am? I do this for a living. And they wanted to put me on, they have like this wellness program. And
Right.
if you go through their wellness program, and you go through that, then they will, I think that they'll take the surcharge off or something. So
Mhm.
I said, okay, fine. Well, I'll go through the wellness program, no problem. So I
Right.
go through this, and then they want to put me with a dietitian. So I did a food log, and I eat crazy healthy, man. I'm
Yeah.
nailed about what I eat. And I had all this, and she goes through it. And all she could tell me, because I eat a lot of coconut milk and stuff like that.
Okay.
She's
Mhm.
like, you should do the low fat coconut milk. Or I need a little goat's milk yogurt. You should do the low fat one. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Do they even make? I don't even know if this brand, they make the organic. It's like the fat is really good for you.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and when you look at it, the people who have the lowest rates of cholesterol, especially people that have been on statins that reduce that, they end up with dementia in that
Yeah.
older age, because
Yeah.
of understanding what cholesterol is doing in your body.
Right.
And so it's reductionist science to say that let's just look at that one number. And if that one number is high, then we need to put you on a drug to get the number down, not to
Right.
make you any healthier. There's no
Right.
science that a statin is actually going to make you live longer.
Right.
Actually, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that's my data geek coming out, my
Mhm.
actuary coming out, that the reductionist science that will state a study that, these people had less heart attacks, but did they live longer?
Right.
Were they healthier? Did
Yeah.
they end up with dementia when they were old because there wasn't enough cholesterol in their body to run their brain and
Yeah.
create neurotransmitters, which are made
Yeah.
out of cholesterol? Anyway,
Right.
so I can go off on
Well,
that.
and
So
when it's something that's, naturally occurring in your body too. Like it's already naturally occurring in your body.
right? Exactly.
And I think this is one of the things that especially in the US confuses a lot of people when it comes to diet,
Yeah.
right? Because like, oh, I went on this diet and I lost weight, and my friend went on it and it didn't change their life at all, or they gained weight, like,
Right.
oh my gosh, but because we're such a melting pot of so many different cultures from the gut microbiome standpoint,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and so what your gut grew up eating
Yeah.
and adjusting to and being able to live and there is a bit of survival of the fittest standpoint in that, like, okay, well, I come from this territory and this is all we have to eat, and so my body's gonna adjust to it, and not just my body individually, but from generationally standpoint,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
like, because I always get that, you know, whenever I talk about nutrition with somebody, and because I'm vegan, and so there, you know, occasionally people say like, oh, well, what about the Eskimos? They eat all kinds of, you know, blubber and blah blah blah. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they've done it
Yeah.
for generations,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they've learned how to, you know, live with those things,
Yeah.
and I would imagine that some of their cholesterol's off the charts
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because
But
of what they
that's
eat.
part of the issue. People say that all disease is genetic because a certain disease runs in families, but part of it is actually you eat how you grew up eating.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is the lifestyle is
Mhm.
learned. And so your parents and your grandparents, not so much your grandparents, because generally our grandparents at our age, you know, they're going that many
Yeah.
generations back, they're eating better. Because
Yeah.
even if they didn't eat, tons of vegetables, grow their own vegetables and all of that, there wasn't all the processed food that there is now
Right.
with all the added chemicals. So it's a
Yeah.
bucket. And I talk about in the book about it's a bucket. And you could get away, 100 years ago, they might not have access to all the different fresh vegetables that we have
Mhm.
and all the high quality supplements and all. So you're saying, how could Rockefeller live to 99 years old?
Yeah.
He lived to 99 years old using homeopathy. He didn't use any of the products that he started selling medical products that have, now some of the big pharmaceutical companies can trace their roots back to Rockefeller. He
Oh
lived to
well.
99. He didn't use any conventional medical therapy. He used homeopathy and ate decently. But back then, they didn't have all the toxins. So
Right.
it's a balance. We've got so many more toxins now in the ultra processed food. If you buy
Mhm.
something that came in a box or a packet, there's so much more crap in that.
Yeah.
And then all the cosmetics and then all the electromagnetic frequencies. And there's
Mhm.
so much more that we're subjecting our bodies to that we need more better nutrition in order
Right.
to balance it out.
Right.
And so you can't really compare the world we're living in today and all the modern
Yeah.
conveniences that we have today to what they had 100 years ago. And so that's why we need to do the extra effort today to eat better. But yeah, I mean, going back to the familial eating habits. And
Yep.
so I think that's why, diabetes. Well, my mother had diabetes or whatever. Yeah, but was she eating similar to what you're eating? I
Yeah.
mean, there's definitely genetic predisposition.
Mhm.
So are you going to wind up with that? What's going to show up first? Is it going to
Yeah.
be diabetes or heart disease or something else, an autoimmune condition? And because I'm an actuary and I like numbers, I talk
Yeah.
about think about how many seconds you've been alive. And I think I
Mhm.
kind of did that calculation for myself. I forget how many it was. I don't know, 20 billion seconds.
Sure.
At every different second, there's good stuff happening to you and there's bad stuff happening to you.
Mhm.
You've got a toxin coming in and it's coming in through your five senses. So
Right.
you've either you're seeing a car accident, or you're hearing something bad, or you're smelling citrus, which is really
Mhm.
good, or you're smelling rotting flesh, or you're injecting a chemical into you versus eating a great big salad with really
Right.
good things. So, and all of this is going on for all of these different seconds of your life. And everybody has a different set of good and bad coming in
Right.
for all of those different seconds. And if you just go back 5 years, cancer didn't start today. If you get diagnosed with cancer today, or you have a heart attack tomorrow, that didn't just happen. It's
Right.
going back 10, 20, 30
Mhm.
years as to all of the different things that has happened to you over those times through the five senses. So is it good or bad? And then also your interaction with the world through your microbiome.
Right.
And you mentioned that a couple of times. And so, God created this world. He created microbes
Mhm.
to interact with us. And
Right.
we could get into the whole flu season
Yeah.
issue that everybody's terrified of viruses. If
Right.
you just start with bacteria, there's good bacteria and bad bacteria, and this is very, very new science. I mean, the last 10 plus years, we've been
Right.
really focusing on the microbiome. So it's very, very new to really understand. And I don't think the scientists will be able to say this is a good microbiome. They analyze everything that's in
Sure.
somebody. This is healthy. This is not healthy. They know generally, well, looking at this, there's not a lot of diversity.
Mhm.
So that's probably unhealthy. So we know diversity is good,
Right.
but something that's bad for somebody like H. pylori. which creates stomach ulcers, they decided. And oh, you should take antibiotics to get rid of it. It exists in healthy people perfectly
Oh yeah.
fine. And all the good bacteria will just, push that one out. So the
Right.
microbiome is, I see it as how we're interacting most closely with the world. So we've got our senses, our ears and our eyes and our touch. Are we hugging somebody, and what good that does to us?
Right.
Seeing somebody smiling at us, that does really great things for us. But the microbiome is how we really interact with all of nature. And
Yeah.
so it's super important, I think, to our health, but it also, again, with our families, just kind of tying that last point, sorry, my brain goes all over the
No,
place.
yeah, you're good.
Tying back to our families, that I think the actual genetics is a tiny piece of the puzzle, because we only have like 20,000 genes or something like that.
Right.
And yet, look how individual we are. But our microbiomes are like more different. They're almost like our fingerprints,
Oh
completely
yeah.
unique. And I
Yeah.
think that is just far more important as to how we interact with the world over, years, every second, but going back years. And that's what's really going to change the trajectory of our lives.
Right. Well, and it's amazing how, you can change the balance of your microbiome and what that does. You talk about flu season, and
Yeah.
it's funny because I've seen, you know, obviously being in the health world, I've got a lot of health friends, and so that, through social connections and different people talking about different things at times of the year of like, okay, make sure you do this for the, it's there's flu season, but then there's, okay, what is it really? Not just, we have Halloween where we have a lot of sugar, and then we go straight into like decadent
Yeah,
foods with
yeah,
Thanksgiving and
yeah,
overeating, and
yeah,
it's also at a time when it's getting colder in our country,
yeah,
and so we're
yeah,
more indoors more.
yeah.
And so it's like, are
Exactly.
we stacking the deck against
Exactly.
ourselves?
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, that is stacking the deck. That's actually a really great way to look at it. So yeah, you've got all of those negative hits to your body. I mean,
Mhm.
Halloween's a lot of fun, but do you really need to
Sure.
ingest all that sugar? But yeah, and then you're inside more. So I talk about the outside, the OAF, the outside air factor.
Mhm.
So, and they discovered this back in, 100, 200 years ago, when they figured out that tuberculosis, if you have
Mhm.
tuberculosis, and they had those sanatoriums, that you get you outside in the sun, and it's going
Right.
to help you, get over that. So the outside air factor, they've analyzed it, and they've done all these different experiments outside at night. So is it just the sun, and it's creating
Right.
vitamin D in your body? And definitely, I talk about get outside in nature. If you
Mhm.
want to boost your immune system, get outside, be in the sun. But
Yeah.
it's more than that. It is definitely more than that. So that there's ozone outside, which, yes, ozone is used in alternative health circles because it's antibacterial. It's naturally
Right.
antibacterial. In dental work, for example, get ozone to kill all the bacteria. But also just the UV light from the sun kills
Right.
bacteria. It's so nuts in COVID, right? They're telling us to stay indoors.
Yeah. I
Get
know.
outside. You're going to
Yeah.
kill the virus. So yeah, I mean, so I think yeah. So I talk about, you don't have to participate in flu season,
Right.
and any of my friends, I say this: if you just get a cold, we've sort of normalized ill health. I think
Mhm.
in society now, that oh, so and so can't come to church today. They've got a cold, and we don't think, oh, I hope you're feeling better soon. If you're getting a cold and it's more than just sneezing for a day, and then you rest for a bit, and then you're fine the next day.
Right.
If it's more than that, it's a wake up call to there's something going on in your body. Your
Right.
body is not working optimally. So, and I think that's why God gives us some of these little ailments. Like even
Mhm.
my neck, I hurt my neck. That's a wake up call. I'm
Yeah.
either too stressed, or I was rushing too much, or whatever is happening, or maybe
Yeah.
there's some inflammation going on in my body. There's something going on. So if you're getting coughs and colds and flu, and it's taking you down for more than
Yeah.
24 hours, this is a wake up call. There's something going on in your immune system, and your immune system drives so much of the
Oh
health
my
of your
gosh.
body.
Yes.
It's your immune system that is searching out those cancer cells. By the
Mhm.
way, ultimately, they're
Yeah.
they're going to search out the cancer cells, and they're going to kill them before they actually turn into something bad. So if your immune system is not working well, don't just say, oh, I have to go to bed for a week, and that's just the season.
Right.
No, you think about it. Did you eat too much sugar? How has your diet been over the last month or
Mhm.
so? Are you getting outside? Are you exercising enough in fresh
Yeah.
air? Are you managing your stress? As you know, stress is such a big one as well to
Oh
manage
yeah.
your immune system.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the elimination of flu season, and we
Yep.
kind of stop talking about.
Well, and I think it'd be easy to do, and it's easier to do without relying on the flu shot.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
there's
So yeah, I mean, I came from corporate, right? So
Mhm.
part of what we did, we advised some of the biggest companies in the world how to keep your employees more healthy so it'll reduce your healthcare costs.
Right.
Okay. One of the things they would do every year, especially in the US, I'm going to give you a flu shot. You can come
Mhm.
to the office today and we'll have your flu shot waiting for you. Aren't we a great employer? And I'd be
Right.
like horrified. And this has become completely normalized in this country. Most other countries don't do that, by the way.
Yeah.
So one or two are sort of looking, well, the US does that. We should maybe think about it. I'm like,
Mhm.
no, please don't. So, yeah. So, I mean, if you just think about the flu shots and where they come from, okay, so there are hundreds of viruses that make us sick, from
Right.
coughs, colds, even influenza has so many different strains. I'm not even
Mhm.
getting into COVID and all those strains,
Right.
but all the ones that have been around for of all time, really,
Yeah.
there's loads of them. And what the flu manufacturers do is 6 months before, so earlier in the year, they'll say, I wonder which strains are going to be circulating this year. And they'll pick a handful because they don't want
Right.
to completely overwhelm your body. So they pick a handful, 5 to 10 maybe, and
Yep.
they'll say, okay, that's what we're going to manufacture. And they roll it out. Well, there's literally in any given year 100 or 200 different viruses circulating,
Mhm.
and they put this shot into you, and yeah, you might create some antibodies to those particular strains, but the odds are very low that that's going to be one of those 5 to 10 are going to be the
Yeah.
strains that you actually encounter. And then on the other side, as well as just what's called the antigen, that's the thing that tells your body to make the antibodies in advance. There's all these chemicals that
Right.
make them do their job, because taking a shot like that is so artificial.
Mhm.
Something that normally you'd breathe in through your nose, a virus, you're out with friends and
Right.
somebody's sick and they breathe on you, you take it in through your nose or your mouth, it hits your tonsils. That's the gatekeeper of your immune system. And people that get tonsillitis and they get inflamed, and that's not great, but that's the tonsils doing their job.
Right.
Don't get me started on all the kids they've taken their tonsils out.
Mhm.
That's like a terrible thing to do, because they're the gatekeeper of your immune system. And in fighting the virus, the first instance of fighting it, your tonsils alert the rest of your immune system, your spleen, your
Mhm.
bone marrow starts churning out all these different immune type cells, your microbiome wakes up and starts helping out all these different aspects of your immune system, which is this amazing orchestra in your body.
Right.
They all get going when you breathe something in through your nose and your mouth. Instead, you take a shot in your arm with all these drugs and with all these chemicals, and they have to put in what's called an adjuvant. Now, an adjuvant is the chemical that tells your immune system, oh, it's coming through the arm into the bloodstream, but you
Mhm.
need to wake up, and it's a bad thing. And you need to make antibodies to it. That's the
Right.
adjuvant. It's toxic by design. It's how it
Right.
wakes up your immune system. And so
Right.
it's usually something like aluminium or
Mhm.
aluminum. Sorry, my Britishness.
No.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
aluminum comes in, or something very like that. So that your body,
Yeah.
it wakes up your immune system. So you're getting a flu shot every year. You may or may not actually help you with the strains you're going to
Right.
encounter, but you're giving an insult to your immune system with all the chemicals and the preservatives. Probably got some formaldehyde in there, which is a
Right.
known carcinogen, because
Mhm.
you don't want bacteria getting into the shots. All sorts of crap they put in there for
Yeah.
it to trick your body into creating antibodies to something that didn't come along naturally. So
Right.
it's actually an insult to your immune system, not
Right.
really giving you any benefit. Even if, as I say, you get a few extra antibodies to a couple of extra strains, you're much better served if you do all these other things we've been talking about. Just
Right.
reduce your reliance on sugar, not reliance,
Yeah.
but reduce how much sugar you're taking. If you feel a little bit of a scratchy throat, or you're feeling a bit tired, that is your body telling you, hey, I'm fighting something. I've got
Right.
a virus right now. I'm kind of fighting something. Then you just cut out all sugar. You
Mhm.
take some vitamin C, some vitamin D, some elderberry
Right.
lozenges or something, some zinc is fantastic, some NAC and acetyl
Mhm.
cysteine. So there's lots of supplements you can take, and that's going to support your immune system to
Right.
work much better. Get out and sit in the sun.
Yeah.
Go for a nice gentle walk in nature.
Mhm.
Get your eyes, some of that good stuff that your eyes can see, stress relief, get with friends. I mean, this whole
Yeah.
nonsense of isolating,
Right.
it actually boosts your microbiome to interact with other people, because
Oh
now you're
yeah.
interacting with their microbiome. And
Mhm.
for the most part, that's going to be good stuff breathed out, and
Yep.
that's going to boost you. So
Yeah.
not to mention all the boost to social interaction that God
Right.
intended us to. So sorry,
Right.
very long-winded, but yeah,
No, but
a flu
and
shot.
one of the things that I that popped into my head was, in the, 80s, I'm a child of the 80s. So in the 80s, somebody got chicken pox. It's like everybody, phew, bring your kids over. Everybody,
Let's
come
have a
on, let's
chickenpox
go.
party.
Right. And it's like
Absolutely, we did that.
everybody gets exposed, everybody goes through
Yeah,
it and move on
yeah,
with life. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and that's granted, of course, I'm sure there's some diseases or viruses that we don't want, to purposefully get exposed to. But having exposure is not the end of the world because it's giving your body the opportunity to
Right.
naturally
Right.
create the
Well, it's
antibodies
it's
to
God's
naturally
design,
deal with it.
right? I mean, chickenpox. You
Right.
brought up. It's a great example. So chickenpox, and again, the U.S. is the only country to give little kids the
Hmm.
chickenpox shot. I had chickenpox as a kid in the UK, 7 or 8 years old, off school for a
Hmm.
week. Everything was fine. But when I came to the US, they wanted to give me the chickenpox shot. And I'm like, what? It's like a really it's a non. I had to find my records to
Yeah.
show that I'd actually had it. But it's absolutely crazy. The other countries don't do that. But the problem is what they've done here is it does work, the shot.
Mhm.
So you get antibodies to chickenpox, and
Yeah.
so all these kids now aren't getting chickenpox in
Right.
their early years. But the problem is chickenpox as a kid under the age of 10. It's not a big deal. You're
Doesn't
you're
hurt you.
sick for a
Yep.
week, you're home, you
Mhm.
have the chickenpox parties, everybody gets sick and you get on with your life. The problem is the shot wears off. So
Mhm.
after 10 or 20 years, your immunity has worn off, and now you're older, and now you're an adult, and now you get exposed to it. It's why shingles is like
Yeah.
skyrocketing. So shingles is from the same virus, the
Right.
virus, and shingles is a nasty illness, a lot of
Yeah.
pain. You can go blind, much more severe as an adult. And what they found, the science, when you actually look at this, that when the kids were getting it under 10 and they're running around having those chickenpox parties, they're boosting the natural immunity of their parents and the other adults that they're around.
Oh, yeah.
Their parents now aren't getting shingles. But the
Yeah.
problem is, once they eliminated chickenpox in young people, now older people aren't getting that boost. And so
Mhm.
they're winding up getting shingles so much more. And
Yeah.
it's God's design. And so we're
Right.
messing around with God's design, and it's
Yeah.
just not a good idea.
Yeah. And so to go back to like how do you boost everything is you go back to what God created, right? Like you go back to he created the plants, he created the nature, he
Yeah,
created you talk about forest bathing, right? Like
yeah,
in
yeah.
in the in there's times where so I'm a runner and I run almost every day and there's a park that's a little bit of more than a mile away from our house. It's got a path that's about three-quarters of a mile. You can make it a mile by going winding around stuff. And sometimes people ask me like, well, why do you run to the park? It's a mile. I'll go on a 10-mile run, but I'll run around that loop like 8 times. They're like, don't you
Oh
get
yeah,
bored? And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
nope. Some days I
Nature.
need to
Yeah,
have that exposure. The tree is
yeah,
right here, right next to me. I
absolutely.
could
Yeah,
grab the leaves as I run
yeah,
by. Like it's a different exposure to running down, even if it's not a busy street, but running down a street and having a car pass by every couple of minutes and getting
yeah,
exhausts and
yeah.
all the other
Right.
stuff. It's
Right.
yeah.
I wrote an article in the so I said my son is an Eagle Scout, my youngest son. He
Mhm.
loves backpacking. And in the summer, every summer he takes his friends and the four boys and they go off backpacking in the Sierra Mountains.
Mhm.
So serious backpacking. He
Yeah.
climbed Mount Whitney, the
Oh
biggest
wow.
mountain in the US. And so
Wow.
they go off with their backpacks and everything, but they need a ride up there.
Mhm.
So I committed. So I'm taking the four boys up there and we go up to the Sierra Mountains. And then I was hiking in with them to, it was like a 5 mile hike. And I stayed overnight with them because it's a
Mhm.
6 hour drive for us to get there.
Yeah.
So I wrote about this because the day before I woke up with the sore throat and I was exhausted, when you're fighting a virus.
Yep.
And so I sort of rested that day. I did my work in the morning and then I said, okay, I'm just going to sit on the couch in the afternoon and kind of rest. And we had to leave at like 4:30 in the morning. And I woke up and I wasn't feeling great. And I had to do this big hike, this 6 hour drive
Yeah.
and then a hike. And I wasn't feeling great, but I'm like, no, I don't, they've been planning this for months. And so off we go and we go in and we get up to the sequoias and it's absolutely magnificent. And
Yeah.
I've got 20 pounds on my back. They've got 50 pounds, but I've got 20 pounds on my back because I'm staying
Yeah.
overnight. And we start hiking in and it's 6,000 feet up to like 8,000 feet. So it
Ooh.
was hard going.
Yeah.
And I'm like putting one foot in front of the other and I'm not feeling great, but then I see all this beauty. And
Mhm.
we just go for that whole afternoon. We were hiking and we went to bed early because we were all
Yeah.
exhausted. And as soon as it was that, woke up the next morning, I was like totally fine. I was feeling better. So
Yeah.
you'd think that after all that exertion, if you were sort of fighting something, you'd get like really sick and that would be a problem.
Yeah.
My cold just completely evaporated. And
Mhm.
I was just feeling, just from being out in all that beauty and
Right.
just, just smelling all the nature and all the
Mhm.
trees and just all the wildlife. And then, yeah, we woke up in the morning and they went off on their trek and I was
Yeah.
trekking out on my own. So I'm
Yeah.
on my own in all this beauty and you're just totally connected with God. It was really
Right.
amazing. But yeah, my cold just
Yeah.
totally evaporated.
Well, and people say, oh, go get some fresh air, but it's that, but it's so much more than
Yeah,
just the fresh
yeah,
air piece of it, right?
yeah, yeah,
If you allow yourself to, if you take your phone and you go outside and you're just on your phone the whole
yeah,
time, like
yeah,
you're missing a big piece of that.
absolutely. Yeah,
You
I
may
see
get
people.
sunlight, but
Yeah, they go for a walk. So I go around my block if I'm working all
Mhm.
day and all I can get out my front door and I have to just do the block. There's
Yeah.
people out there with earphones in. So you got all
Hmm.
that EMF going into your
Hmm.
brain and you're concentrating on what you're listening to, or they're listening to a podcast, which is fine.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I'd rather you didn't have those in and you
Yeah.
just breathing the fresh air and looking around you at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
green.
Because it's more than just what you eat,
Right.
right? There's all your senses, it's everything you expose yourself to.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that you can't see,
Yeah. Yes.
it's the stuff that you
Yes.
breathe that you can't see. It's the
Yeah.
microbiomes, the bacteria, the viruses, and it's almost learning to live in like the orchestra of life with all those things in partnership.
Exactly, exactly. It's how God designed it. And so the
Yeah.
health of your terrain, so it's terrain theory versus germ theory, right? I don't know if
Hmm.
you've chatted
Hmm.
about that on your podcast before, but yeah. So you could have a really bad virus or bacteria, which you could call it pathogenic,
Right.
but if your body is strong and you're healthy and you're managing your stress and you're eating well and your body is working well, the orchestra is working well, you're just gonna, yeah, you might feel tired for an afternoon just while
Yeah.
you're fighting it and getting things going, and then you wake up the next day, you get a good night's sleep.
Hmm.
So we gotta mention that sleep,
Yep.
super super important, right up there.
Yep.
Get your solid sleep, and then you'll wake up the next day and you'll be fine. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's not all pathogenic. I mean, even Ebola is
Hmm.
completely curable with
Yeah.
high dose vitamin C. And people are
Right.
terrified about some of those things. Oh gosh, there's Ebola in Africa and it might come here.
Right.
All those things can be cured. And
Hmm.
so it's God's
Yeah.
design.
Well, and that's one of the things that we all, or I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of us experienced with COVID was the test, right? And you go somewhere and they're like, oh, I got to test you. And I remember I went to a race in Atlanta, and this was in 2022. And it was February, so we're almost 2 full years, and they were still testing because people were coming in from all over the country, and they're like, okay, we gotta, and it was the first time that I'd ever been tested. And the nurse that was doing it was just shocked. She was like, "Are you serious? This is your first?" I was like, "Yeah, it's the first time." She was like, "Have you never?" I was like, "No, I haven't got it. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna
I got
get
a better
it."
story for you. I don't
I'm
really have
like,
time for this, but
you know,
I was the same way. So in June 2022, never had a shot, never got COVID. My family was super healthy. We just kind of lived normal lives. We went
mhm,
hiking in Montana. We had an amazing vacation in 2020. But I hadn't been to England to see my family. I wasn't allowed
mm,
in. I
right,
wasn't
yeah,
my dad, who's 85, he kept getting shots. He was
mhm,
still very in conventional medicine. And every time he got a shot, he was hospitalized. He was getting sicker
yeah,
and sicker and sicker from all those shots. And my brothers
yeah,
eventually said, "Hey, you have to get here. I don't think he's going to last the year." And he was super healthy
yeah,
before COVID hit. And so June 2022, I was so stressed about going because
mhm,
I've been talking to them and trying to talk them out of getting any more boosters.
right,
And so I was getting all the supplements ready. I had my big thing of vitamin C and I had NAC and I had all these stuff and I was packing and everything and I was very busy at work and I was doing all these things. And then I took a red eye. So I'm
mhm,
flying through the night and I get there. I think like on a Wednesday. Oh, and I took my dad to a functional medicine doctor
right,
because I wanted him to hear from an actual doctor who would tell him the things I've been trying to tell him.
yeah,
And so I get there and I wasn't feeling great by the next day. And the next day after that, I was in my office and my work was all global. So I was in my London office. And so I'm in there all day. I had a blinding headache all day. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
it's just jet lag. And so now it's another day, and I've been with my elderly parents this whole time, and they're like, "Oh, you've got to get tested before you come see us." I'm like, "I have not been tested in 2 years. I don't need to be tested."
Yeah.
And then on the Friday night, so I'm totally gluten free. I'm vehemently gluten free. I just cannot handle gluten. But Friday night, we went to my brother's for dinner, and they had sticky toffee pudding, which is my favorite thing
Yeah.
on the planet.
Yeah.
And so, and I always, sometimes in my head, I go, well, gluten's okay in Europe. It's not quite as bad as in the US.
Right.
So
Right.
I have the gluten right. And so Saturday morning, I'm in the bathroom. I'm so ill. I collapsed.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I might need to take a test. I got COVID. I
Yeah.
picked it up from all my stress and
Mhm.
running and then eating all my English stuff that I
Yeah.
miss
Yeah.
and all the sugar and all the
Yeah.
stress. Dealing with my family in the UK is always stressful. And I
Yeah.
wound up with COVID and I gave it to my elderly parents.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but I hadn't been tested either in 2 years. And then the one time I said, "Oh, I don't need to be tested." Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, funny story.
Yeah. But
They're fine, by the way. They were fine. They
it
got
just
it.
shows like, it does. It shows how much the other parts of life play into it, right? Because that added stress,
Yeah.
the travel, all the stuff that's abnormal, like it, and knowing that it's family related, and I mean that adds,
Yeah.
most people can understand the stress that adds to life. That you're compromising your immune system
Right.
through all of that, right? And so
Absolutely.
it definitely in 2 years was not the first time you were exposed to COVID,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like there's absolutely
Absolutely.
no way that was the case, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I was totally living normal life.
Yeah,
We had to say huge church, hundreds of people
yeah,
every weekend. We were there multiple times a week. We were totally mixing with people.
mhm,
Yeah, yeah, totally
yeah.
right. Yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's just it's all those other things that you're doing to yourself,
yeah,
just like we talked about with the flu season, like all those
yeah,
other things you do that you're not allowing your immune system to be either to be either 100% fully prepared for whatever,
mhm.
or to not be distracted with other things.
Yes,
And then you
exactly,
just pile too many things on there and it just can't handle
exactly.
it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to be very respectful. We're sort of over the hour that I promised you we'd stay under, but
Okay.
how can people, like, your book's on Amazon, but how can
Yeah.
people, connect with you, follow you, be able to get more information about what you're doing?
Yeah, so my home base is really emmatekstra.com.
Okay.
And so go there. But yeah, I've got a Substack, so you can sign up for my Substack. I'm writing articles pretty much every week. And so I do teach courses. My courses are more for sort of corporate, because I'm trying to have
Right.
employers wake up to how
Yeah.
they're delivering healthcare to their employees, because
Yeah.
especially in the US, most people are covered by their employer's plan.
Mhm.
And so that's what I do a lot of. But I do have some that are directed to individuals. So I have one
Yeah.
that's kind of 45 minutes, totally free, that kind of goes through some of the key points in my book. So
Yeah.
yeah, but emmatekstra.com will get you to all the other places. And so that's probably the
Awesome.
best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, I will link that in the show notes.
Okay.
Is there anything for somebody that is like, struggling with that? Maybe they're struggling with that concept of, okay, but the doctor's always been like, that's who I'm supposed to listen to. How can I open up to another pathway of healing or of health or of any of that kind of stuff? Like, because you sort of had that light bulb moment when you sat down and had a cup of coffee with someone. What would you tell somebody who's struggling with that? Like, how much do I give to each side of this equation?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one, and it's very
Mhm.
individual. It really depends on where you are in your health journey. Are you pretty healthy today, and you just want to stay that way? Are you struggling with something really major? And
Mhm.
that's what I go through in the book. So, and it gives you the background as to what your doctor has learned. But I also give you some questions. So questions to take to your doctor. So
Mhm.
you just got to be empowered to take control of your own health. Only
Yeah.
you know your body. I don't know your body.
Right.
Only you know your body. The
Right.
doctor that you're talking to doesn't know your body like you know your body. Even
Mhm.
if you get to a functional doctor or a holistic doctor, a naturopath, something like that, they don't know your body like you know your body. So you
Right.
have to learn your own body. So
Yeah.
if you're kind of skeptical to start with, then keep on with all that conventional stuff, although please don't have any more flu shots. But keep on with some of the other stuff that your doctors are telling you to do. But then
Yeah.
just try a few other things. Go for a walk next time you're
Yeah.
feeling stressed. just see what it does for you. And so do it in parallel. And then that's the best way. And then you can reduce some of those things, because then your regular doctor will go, oh, your numbers are looking better. We could reduce this. And that is a lot of what happens definitely in functional medicine. And a lot of what I advise on, these solutions that are coming out. I work with a lot of companies that are bringing health solutions to market, and they have, you might call it alternative, but it's really functional medicine. So if you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, so you've got multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or something like that, and your doctor's got you on all these drugs, and you don't want to jump away from that altogether and do something else, then they will get you a coach, look at your diet, look at some of the things, maybe it's a food allergy that's causing some of that problems. And so you do it in parallel. And so they will just focus on you, or maybe somebody like you, talk to you, you'll help on that side of things, and then stick with your conventional doctor, and then they'll see that things are improving, and then they'll start to ratchet back on the medication themselves. So you can mix and match these things, but it's just you've got to think and own your own health, and that only you know your body. And you might say, yeah, but I don't understand all the science, and I'm not. It is very complicated, but don't think your doctor has all the answers either. Only God has the answers as to how our amazing body works. So, they've done a lot of schooling, sure, but it's complicated, yet it's simple. You treat it right. I just use it. If you're really not sure, did it exist 100 years ago? That's what I said. Did it exist 100 years ago? And if it existed 100 years ago, it's probably good for you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, you probably would.
No, but I love that. And that's so true. And it's one of those things that is like, look back past sort of the marketing stage and the food process, the manufactured food stage of life, and go like, okay, well, what, yes, we've had a lot of technology advances and all that kind of stuff, but what was around then is probably still good now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for being a guest. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.